Every Ukrainian person has a dream to live freely on their land.
Здійснити її можна лише в один спосіб – вигнати окупантів.
The only way to make this happen is to drive away the occupants.
А для цього потрібна ваша допомога.
And for that, we need your help,
Зброя.
military help.
Нам також потрібна допомога Америки і всього вільного світу для притягнення до відповідальності всіх причетних до російської агресії.
And we also need help from both the United States and the rest of the world to hold accountable all those who committed those crimes.
Від рядових службовців до самого вищого керівництва Росії.
From rank and file servicemen to all the highest level commanders.
Українські правоохоронці роблять все необхідне, аби зібрати всю інформацію.
Ukrainian law enforcement officials doing everything needed to collect this information.
Ідентифікувати військових злочинців і засудити їх.
To identify the war criminals and have them put to trial.
Особисто хочу подякувати генеральному прокурору Андрію Костіну за його велику роботу, за таке тепле.
I want to express my special thanks to Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Mr. Kostin, for his humane attitude and all the work he's doing about this.
Але для того, щоб добитися повної відповідальності для російського керівництва і всіх злочинців, необхідна, звичайно, ваша допомога.
But we realize that your help is needed in order to hold the highest leaders of Russia accountable for those crimes.
Допомога всіх цивілізованих країн.
As well as the help from all other civilized nations.
Світ має показати, що не закриває очі на масові вбивства, на тортури, на зґвалтування.
The world must show that people are not closing eyes at those crimes, torture, rape.
Тому Росія має бути притягнута.
So Russia must be held accountable.
До відповідальності за всі свої лиходійства, які вона спричинила Україні.
For all the evil it has caused Ukraine.
Проти українців.
Against Ukraine.
Ми, хто пережили ці злочини, ми вже хочемо справедливості.
We, the survivors of those crimes, we do want justice to be brought.
Справедливої відплати.
Just and fair payback.
Дякую за вашу увагу.
Thank you for your attention.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for the courage to tell your story. Chair now recognizes the representative for the second victim to tell his story about being kidnapped by Putin's forces and sent to Russia for quote-unquote re-education, along with the thousands of other Ukrainian children.
Я вітаю вас, шановні пані та панове.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen.
Моє ім'я Катерина Бобровська, я є адвокатом українським неповнолітньої особи, яка була повернена з території Росії до України.
I'm Katerina Bobrovska, Ukrainian attorney representing a minor, Ukrainian minor who was returned from Russian territory back to Ukraine.
Будь ласка, допоможіть мені.
I ask you to help me.
Я хочу повернутися в Україну.
I want to go back to Ukraine.
Такі були перші слова.
Those were the first words.
16-річного Романа, коли він звернувся до мене по допомогу.
From the 16-year-old Roman who, when he contacted me for help.
Роман – це сирота та учень професійного ліцею в невеличкому селищі Донецької області.
He is an orphan attending a vocational school in Donetsk Oblast.
24 лютого 2022 року
February 24th of 2022, he was at his school.
А невдовзі росіяни окупували населений пункт.
And Russians very soon occupied that community.
Вони здійснювали фізичний та моральний тиск на дітей, які залишились у гуртожитку.
They were pressuring the students, the kids who stayed in that boarding house, the dormitory, physically and morally.
Документи, телефони та інші особисті речі дітей постійно перевірялися.
They continued checking their papers, their telephones and other personal belongings.
Візити військових до гуртожитку ставали дедалі частішими.
The military continued visiting that dormitory more and more often.
А тиск все більшим.
The pressure was getting stronger and stronger.
Одного разу російський бронетранспортер
And there was an instance when a Russian armored vehicle
навіть направив дуло гармати
directed its gun in a turret
на дітей, які стояли біля входу.
right at the children standing near the entrance.
Розуміючи, що в таких умовах неможливо перебувати, Роман
understood he could not exist in those conditions.
Роман прийняв рішення йти додому.
He made a decision to walk home.
60 кілометрів.
It was 60 kilometers away.
Він йшов пішки.
Walked on
Взимку.
foot in winter.
За цей час їх неодноразово зупиняли російські військові.
He and others with him were stopped by Russian military many times.
Вони проводили допити,
They interrogated the kids,
наводили на дітей зброю
aiming their guns at the kids,
та навіть стріляли над головою.
even shooting above their heads.
Їм доводилось спати на вулиці
They had to sleep outdoors
та просити їжу у місцевих жителів.
and beg for food from local residents.
Коли Роман дістався домівки,
When Roman finally got to his home,
до населеного пункту заїхали військові.
military moved in to that community as well.
Представники окупаційної влади
Occupation authorities
направили Романа на медичне обстеження.
told Roman to go for a medical exam,
Його забрали до місцевої лікарні, де вже перебували і інші діти.
and he was put in a local
Його забрали до місцевої лікарні, де вже перебували і інші діти.
and he was put in a local and at that hospital he was notified that he will now have a different family.
Окупаційна влада не взяла до уваги те, що законним представником має бути брат або сестра. В нього були рідні брат.
The occupation authorities ignored the fact and his words that he wanted his brother or sister to be his legal representatives because he had them there.
Через деякий час Романа було направлено до іншої лікарні у Донецьк,
Later he was sent to another hospital in Donetsk,
де Роману було виготовлено нове свідоцтво про народження
where they issued him with a new birth certificate
від імені невизнаної республіки.
on behalf of that unrecognized republic.
А у травні Романа та інших дітей відправили на відпочинок до Росії,
Then in May he with other kids was sent to Russia for vacation,
де українських дітей відвідала уповноважена президента Російської Федерації.
where the Ukrainian children are visited by Russia's representative of the president for kids matters.
З прав людини Марія Львова-Білова,
Maria Lvova-Belova, the representative for human rights.
яка повідомила дітям, що невдовзі вони будуть всиновлені.
She informed these children that soon they are going to be adopted.
Проте Роман та інші діти висловили своє заперечення та наполягали на поверненні їх до України.
But Roman and others insisted on returning back to Ukraine. They said they didn't want to be adopted.
Після цього цих дітей відправили до інтернату,
And then those children were sent to a boarding school.
де суттєво обмежували свободу,
At the boarding school, their freedom was significantly restricted.
а зокрема їм було заборонено виходити на вулицю.
They were not allowed to walk outside the building.
Згодом Роману підібрали нову родину,
Eventually, they found a new family for Roman.
яка намагалася перевиховати хлопця.
They tried to reshape his mind.
Його змушували дивитись пропагандистські програми,
They made him watch propaganda programs on TV.
обговорювали новини про Україну в негативному контексті,
They discussed news reported about Ukraine in a negative clue.
обмежували спілкування з однолітками
They were restricting his communication with peers,
та відслідковували його пересування через спеціальні програми на мобільному телефоні.
and they tracked his movements through a special app on his phone.
Крім того, Романа знімали в пропагандистських сюжетах на телебаченні,
They also featured him in propaganda stories on TV,
у яких змушували розповідати, як йому подобається його нова родина та
and
нове
forced him
життя.
to say that he liked his new family and his new life.
І йому примусово оформили паспорт громадянина Російської Федерації.
He was forced to obtain a passport of the Russian Federation,
Проте одразу забрали цей документ,
but then immediately they took it away from him,
аргументуючи це тим, що буде оформлення всиновлення.
saying that they will process papers for adoption.
Незважаючи на всі ці обмеження,
Despite all these restrictions,
Роман за допомогою українських волонтерів
Roman was able to use help from volunteers from Ukraine
зміг повернутися до України.
and get back to Ukraine.
Подробиці його повернення не можуть бути розголошені з міркувань безпеки.
For safety reasons, I cannot disclose all the details of how this was accomplished.
В Україні він отримав необхідне медичне обстеження, допомогу та операцію.
In Ukraine, he received necessary medical assistance, exam, and surgery.
Станом на сьогодні він почувається добре.
At this time, he's feeling well.
Проте подібні злочини постійно вчиняються проти тисячі інших українських дітей.
But similar crimes are committed regularly against thousands of other Ukrainian children.
Просто зараз,
Right
в цю
now,
саму мить.
at this very moment.
До прикладу,
As an example,
до мене також звернувся інший підліток.
I was contacted by another
На ім'я
teenager.
Богдан.
His name is Bogdan,
Він уродженець також Маріуполя.
also born in Mariupol.
Він разом з Романом знаходився у Росії
Together with Roman, he was in Russia,
і також отримав нову сім'ю.
also received a new family.
Прийомна сім'я також в нього відібрала документи.
The adopting family also took away his papers,
Тоді він звернувся до мене по допомогу.
and then he reached out to me for help.
Богдан зазнавав постійного психологічного тиску
Bogdan was under permanent psychological pressure,
та дуже хотів повернутися до
and
України.
he was eager to go back to Ukraine.
Він намагався покинути територію Російської Федерації.
He tried to leave the territory of the Russian Federation.
Він подолав понад 1000 кілометрів.
He traveled for more than 1,000 kilometers.
Проте на кордоні його зупинили російські спецпризначенці.
But at the border, Russian Spetsnaz soldiers stopped him
Та доставили до слідчого комітету на допит.
and delivered to investigative authorities for interrogation.
Після чого Богдана також використовували для зйомок у пропагандистських сюжетах
After that, he also was featured in propaganda stories on TV,
на російському телебаченні.
on Russian TV.
Коли я побачила сюжет,
And when I saw one of those stories,
знятий з ним вже після його затримання,
after he was detained,
я помітила значні переміни.
I noticed important changes in him.
Темні кола під очима
He had dark areas under his eyes,
та змінена зачіска.
and his hair cut was changed.
Його підстригли, начебто для служби в армії.
They cut his hair short as if he was going to serve in the military.
Розповіді Богдана на російському телебаченні не відповідали дійсності.
The words he was saying on Russian TV were not adequate to what really was happening.
Ймовірно, Богдана залякували, аби він говорив те, що хотіла російська влада.
Apparently, he was either threatened or was just told to say what the government wanted.
Коли Богдан вирішив повернутися в Україну,
When he decided to go back to Ukraine,
ми знали, що у нього немає документів.
we knew he did not have papers.
Саме тому нами було виготовлені необхідні документи для перетину ним кордону.
So we issued appropriate papers for him to be able to cross the border.
Коли він відправився з точки А,
And when he started his trip from point A,
я виїхала до нього на зустріч.
I went there to meet him.
але також була зупинена російськими спецслужбами.
But I too was stopped by Russian servicemen.
А наступного дня я дізналася, що Богдана затримали.
And the next day I was told that he had been detained.
Схожість історії Романа та Богдана
The stories of Roman and Bogdan have a lot in common,
свідчить про системність та поширеність цих злочинів
and this tells us that such crimes are systemic and widely spread,
на тимчасово окупованих територіях.
and they happen in those temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine.
Свідчить про детально сплановану операцію.
These facts tell us that this was a detailed, premeditated operation
З депортації українських дітей.
aimed to deport Ukrainian children to Russia.
Ці заходи спрямовані на позбавлення їх української ідентичності.
Those measures are aimed at depriving the children of their Ukrainian identity.
Історія Романа має щасливе завершення.
Roman's story has a happy ending.
Його вдалося повернути додому.
He was able to go back to his family, to his home.
Втім, Богдана, як і інших дітей,
But Bogdan, like
вони
other
фактично залишаються у полоні.
Ukrainian children, are essentially still in captivity.
Я закликаю міжнародну спільноту
So I appeal to the international community
об'єднатися
to come together
та вживати спільних заходів
and jointly take measures
для посилення тиску на країну-агресора Росію,
to put more pressure on the aggressor country, Russia,
або домогтися повернення всіх вимушено переміщених
in order
українських дітей.
to make them return all Ukrainian children back to Ukraine.
Це наш моральний обов'язок
This is our moral duty,
повернути кожну дитину додому.
to return every child back home.
Сьогодні вночі
This night,
мені написала повідомлення ще одна дитина.
I received a message from another child.
На моє питання, чому ти не спиш,
When I asked, why are you not asleep?
він повідомив наступне. Я зачитаю.
This is what he wrote to me, and I will read out what he wrote.
Ця дитина знаходиться на території Російської Федерації.
This child is now on the territory of the Russian Federation.
Мені тяжело спати.
It's hard for me to sleep.
Я столько смертей видел.
I saw so many deaths,
А мучает две
and
смерти.
there are two deaths which keep torturing my conscience.
Лучшего друга и маленькой девочки,
One was the death of my best friend, and the other was a little girl
которую я не мог спасти.
who I was not able to rescue.
Друг прикрыл меня своим телом.
The friend covered me with his body,
Его разорвало.
and he was blown apart.
Он единственный, кто со мной всю жизнь был свою.
He was the only one who had been with me all my life.
После смерти родителей единственный, кто оставался со
After
мной
the death of
рядом.
my parents, the only one who stayed next to me.
А девочка,
But the girl,
мы когда ехали по воду на моей машине,
when we were driving in my car to get water,
я услышал крики,
I heard people shouting. I
остановился,
stopped,
выбежал.
ran out.
Там лежало тело женщины
I saw a body of a woman,
и девочка с дырой в груди.
and there was a girl with a hole in her chest.
Лет 10 ей
She
было.
was about maybe 10 years old.
Она умирала и кричала
She was
«помогите».
dying and crying, help.
Я ее взял на руки и
I took
успокаивал.
her in my arms, was trying to calm her down,
Там уже нечем было
because
помочь.
there was nothing we could do for her.
Этот момент, когда я стараюсь улыбаться,
This is the moment when I'm trying to smile to calm her down,
чтобы ее успокоить. И говорил ей, что все будет хорошо.
And I was telling her everything will be all right.
А душу мою
But
раздирало.
my soul was being torn apart.
Я благодарю всех вас
Thank you all
за те, що ви надали змогу
for giving us this opportunity
розповісти
to
про ці
share
страшні випадки.
about these terrible instances.
Дякую вам.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that testimony. I will let the members know the child victim is actually in the room next door and per the embassy's instructions to protect his identity. But this is just one of many stories we've heard. In fact, over 20,000 children have been abducted, taken into Russia for indoctrination. We're going to take a quick break for our next witness to the Prosecutor General. Thank you for being here today. The purpose of this hearing is to expose Russian war crimes and other atrocities in Ukraine and to ensure that the world never forgets. I also hope to discuss efforts to ensure perpetrators up to the highest levels of the Kremlin face justice. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. We just heard two horrific and heartbreaking stories from victims of Russia's ongoing war crimes in Ukraine. Sadly, those are just two examples of the more than 80,000 war crimes that the Prosecutor General's office has recorded. From the beginning of Russia's war of aggression in Ukraine, Russian troops have been engaging in unspeakable acts against the Ukrainian people. To break the will of the Ukrainian people, Russia has employed the use of terror through barbaric war crimes, from sexual violence, including the rape of children and the elderly, to mass executions and torture, all targeted at innocent civilians. Shortly after this unprovoked invasion, I introduced the Ukraine Invasion War Crimes Deterrence and Accountability Act, which was signed into law. It requires the administration to report to Congress on the U.S. response to war crimes being committed in Ukraine. Disappointingly, the administration has failed to provide this report to date. Over the last 14 months, what we've witnessed is bone-chilling. The bombing of a maternity hospital, corpses littering the streets of Bucha, hands tied behind their backs, bullets in their head, some of them decapitated. Bullets in their head, some of them decapitated. Graves. Countless torture chambers throughout Russian-occupied territory, mobile crematoriums, of 20 children, along with blowing up a pit of more than 50 wounded captives. They admitted they were given orders to, quote, shoot without words, end of quote, at anyone over the age of 15. Russian soldiers and Wagner Group mercenaries, in horrific detail I've heard, it's been reported, carry Viagra with them to forcibly rape women and children. I personally heard an account from a Ukrainian mother who saw her 5-year-old daughter gang raped to death by 10 Wagner mercenaries who then threw her dead body on the side of the road. This is happening right now. They're monsters, and they need to be brought to justice. One would think the horrors of such acts would have been discarded into the ash heap of history, as Ronald Reagan once said. But sadly, the depravity of Russia's invading forces knows no bounds. We have seen the mass deportation and relocation of Ukrainian children. Tens of thousands of children have been kidnapped, handed over to Russian families, and forced into pro-Russian re-education systems. These are more than war crimes. These are more than crimes against humanity. What we are witnessing in Ukraine is genocide. By definition, genocide is, quote, the intention to destroy a people in whole or in part, including by forcibly transferring children of the group to another group. Putin and Kremlin's senior officials have made clear that their intent is to systematically wipe out Ukraine's existence. The free world cannot sit idly by and allow this to happen. It is beyond time that this administration, along with our allies, provide Ukraine with the weapons they need to win. We need to do more than just give Ukraine enough for survival. We urgently must give them longer-range systems, such as ATACMS, for victory. These are critical to not only destroy the Iranian drones in Crimea that have been devastating to Ukraine's civilian infrastructure, but also to enable Ukraine to push forward with its imminent counteroffensive to recapture its territory and liberate its own people from the daily threat of this Russian terror. History will judge this moment and ask what we did to stop this. No country can remain neutral in the face of such evil. Genocide must not be tolerated by the free world. And just as we held perpetrators of genocide to account in the Nuremberg trials following World War II, we must also hold Putin and his soldiers accountable for the Russian horrors inflicted on Ukraine. History will judge us by what we do here and now. With that, the chair now recognizes the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can't be human and not feel the evil that has been done to our witnesses, to the Ukrainian people. You can't be human it's devastation. You can't be human and see, as I have seen, traveling to both Ukraine and Poland, the torture, the devastation, the destruction of families. Never thought in the year 2023 you would see such devastation again. The question is, how can any leader, any human being, I thought that maybe we would have learned by now that we don't treat others in the manner of evil and destruction that we see. This, in the way that the Ukrainians are suffering every day that Russia's brutal war continues. And I can't help but even think that even when you look at the destruction, when the fighting stops, Ukrainians will have to deal with all of the consequences of this evil act, the scars. We heard the representative talk. Could you imagine the scars of that witness that we have in the back? They will last a lifetime. The scars, the trauma. The young children who, as you see, and I've seen on the streets, that trauma will be with them for a lifetime. The decimated towns and cities that Russia's illegal war for what? For what? We've had the opportunity to hear the first-hand accounts of the two victims who have lived through Russia's war. Ordinarily, you just say, I'd like to thank both for their presence today, and I do. I sure wish they did not have to be here. But I think that the world needs to hear their testimony. Tragically, the experiences that they've been forced to endure is happening all across Ukraine. Mr. McCall has listed several other events. I've seen and talked to other victims. And so, I've seen and talked to other victims. And so, what I want them to know, we feel your pain, we hear your voices, and the voices of all of your compatriots. And we cannot let your suffering be in vain. Thanks to your efforts, the world is aware of Putin's brutality, from directing the abduction of children and the massacre of civilians to the targeting of hospitals and indiscriminate attacks in densely populated areas. We're here today to examine the work that is being done to bring perpetrators of these war crimes to Ukraine to justice. The ICC has been laying legal groundwork for accountability since Russia's initial invasion in the spring of 2014, when Russia began to kidnap children from Ukraine. And though this was at the time on a smaller scale, because it's important to know that this just started. It started in 2014 in Crimea. It has been going on for too long, which shows that we cannot just turn our head. You know, we have to remember that Putin claims that Ukraine is run by fascists. Oh my God. Has he looked in the mirror? Has he looked in the mirror? We hear statements from Russia officials and from Russian disinformation outlets which seek to dehumanize Ukrainians. How can one take the turn and turn it around? How can a human being look himself in the mirror? How can they try to create a false narrative when clearly the whole world sees who the aggressor and who's committing the criminal acts? And so, yes, the United States and our allies and partners must work diligently to ensure records and document every piece of this criminal history, beginning in 2014. And we must collect it so that all those who are responsible for war crimes and crimes against humanity and other human rights violations are held accountable. They cannot get away with it. They cannot think that just some kind of agreement can happen and then they walk away from this crime, yes, from this genocide that is being attempted. They must be held accountable. And as the war grinds on, the wheels of justice have to move as well. And I stand in strong support of U.S. assistance in this space and for the establishment of a special hybrid tribunal to address the crime of aggression. And I applaud the formalization of cooperation between the United States and European states and our war crimes accountability team. And I know the legal path to justice is precarious, but we in the United States Congress are determined to provide the support needed to secure justice for victims. Ukrainians did not ask for this unjust war. They are only asking for our support as they defend their home and their sovereignty. And it is in our national interest to provide the support to Ukraine so it wins this war. And it will. And after Ukraine wins, post-conflict justice and accountability must be central in any post-war reconstruction effort. I yield back.
Joe yields back. I want to thank you for your moral clarity as always and vision. I'll never forget being on the Polish border of Ukraine with you 2 weeks after the invasion, and there were thousands, and Ms. Wagner was there as well, thousands of women and children of refugees leaving their husbands and fathers behind to fight the war, but thousands of them. It could have been in black and white, and it would have looked like 1939 all over again. And every time I travel to Poland, they tell me that. This reminds us of 1939. We cannot let history repeat itself. So with that, I'm pleased to welcome the Prosecutor General of Ukraine, Mr. Kostin, before us today. We've met several times. The last time I saw you, sir, was at the mass grave in Bucha, a very moving experience. I commend you for shining a light on this darkness and these Russian atrocities that have been committed in Ukraine, and I yield to you, sir, for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning. Chairman McCall, Ranking Member Mix, and the distinguished members of the committee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to appear before you today and unmask war crimes and other atrocities that Russia is committing in Ukraine. At the outset, I wish to convey my sincere gratefulness to the United States, its government and people for your unwavering and continuous support to Ukraine. Sadly, the heinous facts described in the statements of the two survivors that we have just heard during the briefing are not anomaly or an exception from what is going on the battlefield. Rather, such a behavior is a feature of Russian military and political doctrine and modus operandi of Russian armed forces and their proxies. The world had witnessed devastating effects of this policy not only in Ukraine, but repeatedly. As described by the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, in his February 18, 2023 announcement, Russia has committed crimes against humanity in Ukraine. And, quote, "These acts are not random or spontaneous. They are part of Kremlin's widespread and systematic attack against Ukraine's civilian population," end of quote. From February 24, 2022, we have observed and documented brutal and deliberate attacks of Russia on residential areas, hospitals, schools, kindergartens, and even theaters in different cities and towns of Ukraine. A tragedy and crime of bombing of Mariupol Drama Theater, which resulted in close to 600 deaths, is the most vulnerable civilian population trapped in Mariupol, is a clear exemplification of the criminal strategy of warfare of Russia. Moreover, Russian forces regularly have been shelling evacuation routes and convoys marked as civilian, systematically practiced torture and rape, and engaged in summary executions, after which mass graves are being discovered throughout the country. These actions have nothing to do with waging war under the rules of international humanitarian law. Their objective rather is to sow fear and terror. As of today, we have registered close to 80,000 cases of war crimes. Evidence of these crimes, however, is growing exponentially. This is particularly connected to the deoccupation of the parts of Ukraine. As an example, when the Ukrainian military liberated Kherson in November 2022, the same pattern of barbaric crimes seen in Bucha and other cities in Kyiv region, Sumy, Chernigiv, and Izyum was also uncovered there. To date, only in Kherson and the region, over 13,000 criminal cases in relation to crimes committed by Russian forces have been launched. 908 civilians are registered dead, only in Kherson region. Allow me to draw your attention to a few examples of atrocities uncovered in this beautiful part of Ukraine. Torture chambers. We have discovered approximately 20 such locations and even more unlawful detention facilities. Over 1,000 torture chamber survivors submitted their evidences. Survivors report that Russian forces subjected them to different forms of abuse, including beating with sticks and rubber batons, use of electric shocks, waterboarding, stripping them naked, threats of death or mutilation, and others. Moreover, they were forced to shout pro-Russian slogans and listen to Russian anthem. While during night, they were hearing screams of others being beaten. In course of investigation, we have discovered evidence of financial records showing a direct linkage between the torture chambers and Russian security agencies. This is a clear sign that policy of torture is a part of criminal plan of Moscow to subjugate Ukrainians. Another systemic and widespread crime we detected is enforced disappearance. There are over 600 individuals whose whereabouts are currently unknown. This is also a pattern that is common to all territories that fell under Russian occupation. Public officials and politically active citizens who dissented from denouncing Ukrainians disappeared or were executed. Occupant forces implemented a full-scale search for pro-Ukrainian or anti-Russia residents, journalists, Ukrainian patriots, and targeted them. In Kherson, like other cities and towns, sexual violence has also been used as a political and military tactic by Russian forces. This was done to humiliate and break resistance of civilian population. We have documented over 60 instances of rape only in Kherson region. I will bring 3 examples. We have an ongoing investigation into the fact of 4 months-long forced deprivation of liberty, continued rape and humiliation of a resident of Kherson region by a Russian serviceman who entered into a house of a victim, stayed there for a prolonged time, and together with rape, threatened the victim and her 9-year-old son with physical violence. We are also investigating cases of rape of minors. In one of the villages of Kherson region, a soldier of proxy forces abducted a minor from the house in the presence of mother and grandmother and raped the victim. We also have a pattern of rape and torture, as well as sexual harassment, specifically against the family members of Ukrainian armed forces. One of the most horrendous crimes Russia is committing is forced transfer. We see on daily basis that from the part of Kherson region, which is still under Russian occupation administration is carrying mass forced relocation of residents, including children, to other temporarily occupied territories or to the Russian Federation. This is the continuation of the strategy of separating Ukrainians, and especially children, from their parents and families, with the objective of their quick assimilation into Russian society. Russia even simplified the process of granting citizenship or to forcibly transfer children. Russia shamelessly violates fundamental tenets of international law. It's committing core international crimes in Ukraine, even though what I managed to discuss is just a tip of an iceberg. It, however, is sufficient to demonstrate inherently criminal plan of the Russian leadership to spread fear and terror and eradicate resistance among Ukrainians so that Russia could remove Ukrainian identity. Moreover, crimes documented are systematic and widespread in nature. These are clear signs of a plan of persecution against Ukrainians as a national group targeting Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian statehood. These patterns are particular to the crime of genocide. Such evil cannot let be. It is our joint responsibility to do everything to uncover horrific crimes that Russia is committing in Ukraine. But exposure does not suffice. To ensure that this never happen again and to provide justice for victims and survivors, all those who orchestrated and enabled commission of core international crimes should be held accountable. Only with discovering and determining truth, bringing perpetrators to responsibility, and providing adequate reparation to victims and survivors, we could say that justice had been done. For these reasons, it would be paramount for us to obtain your support on various legislative initiatives, such as condemning an illegal abduction and kidnapping of children from Ukraine to Russia, designating the Russian-based mercenary Wagner Group as a foreign terrorist organization, Oligarch Assets for Ukrainian Victory Act, authorizing the Department of Justice to transfer to the Department of States the proceeds of property seized pursuant to sanctions to be used to provide assistance to Ukraine, as well as supporting the creation of special tribunal for the punishment for the crime of aggression of Russia against Ukraine. I understand that the US Congress has considered further amendments to the penal code to include a new provision criminalizing crimes against humanity, which would prevent impunity for such crimes when perpetrators appear on United States soil. When the US takes the lead on these issues, the world watches. And it emboldens our own efforts in obtaining international justice. I'm confident that Ukraine, hand in hand with the United States and other countries of the civilized world, will achieve this. Thank you, and I stand ready to answer your questions.
Thank you, sir. And from one prosecutor to another, I commend you for your courage, your bravery, and your just a strong character to seek justice against these monsters. I want to ask you about these children. I think about 20,000 now, and that's just the ones we know about, have been abducted and transferred into indoctrination camps in Russia. Do we have any, is there any evidence of this? How high of a level do you think this comes from?
One of the most challenging tasks for all of us is to identify not only the number of children who were forcibly deported, but also to identify where they are. You know that according to our information, we have information about up to 20,000 Ukrainian children who were forcibly deported. And only a small part of them returned home. For this, we need a strong, unified pressure over Russian leadership in order to return Ukrainian children back home. This is easy if they want to do it. There is a set of international legislation which could be used in order to return children via third countries, via international organizations, to their families and to their country. I always ask all the leaders I meet to raise this issue on daily basis, using all your influence on international level, that Russians will return our children home. It's also important and I would say historic that the first arrest warrant issued by the International Criminal Court as a matter of war crime committed during this full-scale aggression is issued against incumbent president of Russian Federation, Putin, and I would say commissioner in brackets for children's rights, Lvova Belova, so that whole world now see that Putin is suspect, war criminal, and the pressure over him and his government to return our children back should be worldwide, including the countries of global south and some others who still try to be neutral or still try to shake hands with Putin and his regime. They also need to see that Putin is a suspect in war crime, which is forced deportation and abduction of Ukrainian children.
Do you believe the orders to abduct and indoctrinate these 20,000 children that we know about, that order comes directly from Mr. Putin?
This order comes, yes, directly from Mr. Putin, and we have a set of legislature acts and a set of his even public statements which confirm that he ordered such policy. And this information is also in line with the findings of the team of prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, with whom we cooperate on constant scale.
And I think it's important that this abduction of children, transporting and indoctrinating falls squarely within the definition of genocide.
Absolutely. We follow our investigation for such war crimes in two dimensions, as war crime and potential as a crime of genocide.
Can you describe that'd be my last question, your relationship with our Department of Justice? Are they fully cooperating with your investigation?
I'm grateful for Department of Justice and personally to Attorney General Mary Garland for unprecedented support and coordination of our efforts. We are also cooperating with other investigation of other war crimes, and we have a cooperation with regard also to the case of deportation of Ukrainian children. The details I will not disclose at the moment.
Thank you, sir. I now recognize the ranking member.
Thank you, Mr. Kostin, again for joining us today and picking up from where Chairman McCall, I think that I understand that you have indeed had a meeting with your counterpart, Attorney General Garland, recently, and that the DOJ is going to increase its support and send additional investigators to The Hague and to our embassy in Kyiv. So let me ask for you to describe the needs of your office, the Office of the Prosecutor General going forward. What sort of forensic labs and equipment and personnel does the office need so that you can continue to be effective? And how are other international partners assisting your efforts in filling capacity gaps that may remain so that you can get and do everything you need so that we can make sure that justice is had?
Thank you. Thank you for your question. We continue to receive all necessary technical support from the US government, which is needed to conduct proper investigation and documentation of the war crimes of this war of aggression. We are grateful for technical support from notebooks, cell phones, personal protective equipment, generators, power stations. You know, we have had very difficult winter, and for many times, some of my offices were cut off energy, were cut off resources for several days. And we are grateful for supply of generators, which helped us to not only to run our offices, but also to proceed our work documenting and investigating war crimes. What we need now more, within the course of our investigations, we collect huge amounts of data that needs to be stored and analyzed, and it requires proper equipment and proper IT solutions. We are now, with the help of our partners in the United States, are in good contact with providers of the data, providers of IT solutions like Microsoft, like Palantir, who are granting us free access to their IT solutions. We need to analyze terabytes of photo, video, voice information to match them for a specific crime scene in order to not to lose any evidence that we have collected. Because it's not only us who are collecting evidences, they're also collected by people, they're also collected by non-governmental organizations, but civil society organizations. And I'm also especially grateful for your assistance to our NGOs and civil society organizations who are really helping us, not only with documenting of war crimes, but also helping us with the communications with witnesses and survivors. You know how sensitive it is in some dimensions. And I'm also grateful, and we will need more assistance, and I believe we will get it. We are now creating a coordination center for the victims, survivors, and witnesses of war crimes under the umbrella of the Office of Prosecutor General. We know that the interests of survivors and victims of this war should be our center of our attention and efforts. And yeah.
Let me also ask, you know, I know that there are multiple efforts, including those at the ICC and the UN, that they contribute to building legitimacy for the establishment of a special hybrid tribunal on the crime of aggression. So how can the United States better support efforts to broaden the legitimacy of international legal mechanisms so that everybody is going after these crimes against humanity, like Putin and some other vicious individuals who are committing those crimes?
Thank you. I think that the establishment of special tribunal for the crime of aggression is an extremely important element of our web of accountability, because the crime of aggression, which is a leadership crime and which led to all other war crimes committed, should be prosecuted and punished on international level. We have our own investigation for the crime of aggression, but we can't reach Troika, including President of Russian Federation, because of his personal immunity. And we need international mechanism, which should have a broad support of all the countries who know that act of aggression was committed and who believe that act of aggression should be punished on international level. It's not only a war of Russia against Ukraine, it's a global war. I don't know any country which doesn't feel the consequences of this war of aggression in many layers, but everyone, this war touched every country in the world. This war touched any citizen, any person in the world. Even if some of them don't understand this now, they will understand this in the future. And it's our joint responsibility, not only before the victims and survivors of this war of aggression, to ensure their measure of justice for the crime of aggression committed by Russians. It's also our obligation before future generations, because you're absolutely right, both of you, that Nuremberg trials ensured long-lasting peace in Europe for decades. Now we have a gap in international system of law and order. We need to fill in this gap and to ensure long-lasting peace for Europe and for global level after this war. And proper international tribunal for the crime of aggression will also play a deterrent factor for any future aggressor who could try to become an aggressor in any part of the world. And I would also add, it's not only our obligation before the victims and survivors of this war, not only our common obligation before the future generations, it's our obligation commemorating all victims of the previous wars and conflicts who didn't receive their measure of justice. We don't need to forget about them. And only united, we will reach this goal. I firmly believe in it. Thank you for your question.
Thank you very much.
Very, very powerful. I remember visiting with a Ukrainian soldier last time I was in Ukraine. He said, "We're fighting for you. We're fighting for the free world." And they are. Chair now recognizes Mr. Smith.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for convening this extraordinarily important hearing. And Mr. Procurator General, thank you for your leadership, your testimony. 78,000 war crimes, I mean, that is outrageous. And the fact that the ICC only just a few weeks ago finally brought action against 2 individuals, as you said, the so-called Commissioner for Children's Issues and, of course, Putin, in a very, very narrow but important area of focus, to me speaks volumes of the lack of response by the international community when it comes to accountability. A year ago, on March 8th, I chaired a hearing of the Tom Lantos Human Rights Commission talking about the need for accountability and bringing a resolution to the United Nations that would do what? Not at the Security Council, but in the General Assembly, to have a tribunal on the war, a crime of aggression. I asked and I introduced a resolution within a couple of days of that, asking that the administration use its voice and vote at the UN and any country in the UN can bring such a resolution to bring this war of aggression tribunal into existence. I had David Crane, the procurator, a man who prosecuted war crimes against Charles Taylor, at a hearing a year ago, and he said the General Assembly could create this. It could do it immediately. You're not going to get it to Security Council. It'll be vetoed by China and by Russia, but it can happen in the General Assembly. So I think, especially based on your incredible work that you're doing, the world has to unite behind such a tribunal. That fact that only 2 people, they're not the only 2 are responsible. You know, even Lukashenko perhaps should be included in that list, but certainly all of these generals and the people that are on the ground committing these horrific war crimes need to be named, indicted, and then brought to trial, like you said, with the War Crimes Tribunal at Nuremberg. So I would ask you, again, all of us, to redouble our efforts to create such an ad hoc tribunal. You know, you look at the ICC, 20 years of existence, over 20 years, they've had 10 convictions. They don't have a stellar track record. I'm glad they've done what they've done, but they don't have a great track record, and they do it very narrowly. They should have done this immediately. We were calling for that. I was calling for that. That's the reason why I had the hearing and the resolution. And so I just would call on all of us, and I know you're doing the hard work. You know, it shouldn't be the country that's being so horribly and cruelly mistreated fall to you to be the accountability mechanism, and yet you're doing it. So following your inspiration, we need an ad hoc tribunal, and we need it now. And I hope that the administration, ours, or any other country that's concerned, would table a resolution at the General Assembly to establish such a tribunal. Your thoughts?
Thank you so much. Thank you for your absolute commitment to ensure full accountability for the aggressor, including for the crime of aggression. And thank you for your understanding that it should be done internationally with wide range of countries supporting this tribunal. We absolutely agree that one of the ways of establishment of this tribunal could be the resolution of General Assembly of United Nations, which will give the right to the Secretary General of United Nations to sign an agreement with Ukraine and to establish international tribunal. Right. We're standing for this position, and we will proceed our communication with all our partners, friends and allies in order to reach this proper solution for the international tribunal. Coming back to the work with our work with the ICC, I will tell you frankly that the speed of reaction of the prosecutor of the ICC in these cases, in the war crimes committed in Ukraine, is unbelievable. It was nothing before. This case, for which was filed by the prosecutor Karim Khan to the ICC, and where ICC issued an arrest warrant, I will tell you, it took us 5 months to prepare this case. This is very speedy manner of work, because we prosecutors, we need to prepare the case. We have no right to lose this case. No one can imagine that it could be happen. That's why we need to be very careful. We have other cases under our consideration. And it's important that in our situation, Ukraine fully cooperated with the International Criminal Court. In some cases before, in the history of the ICC, their national government is unwilling or unable to, and we are able, and we are grateful for the ICC that first case they filed before the international, we are grateful for the ICC that first case they filed before the international, Khan, that first case they filed before the ICC is fully complementary in its nature, because we can't prosecute Putin because of his immunity. And this...
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. We now...
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. We now.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Congressman Chris Smith of New Jersey. We now.
And acknowledge the courage of those witnesses and the representatives who shared their stories this morning. They're commonplace. Last year I was at the border of Ukraine and met with people on the ground. They're commonplace. Last year I was at the border of Ukraine and met with people on the ground, met with people on the ground, met with people on the ground. Citizens of Ukraine, as nonprofits, citizens of Ukraine working together. You know, as a former district attorney, I've listened to stories of so many victims of the most heinous crimes. And I know the scars and the trauma that they leave behind. And I also know the importance of obtaining justice for those going forth on these unthinkable crimes. And also the importance of swift action while this is taking place. And I commend you for a terrific job that you're doing in this regard, a hard job of doing this so quickly with urgency, because that'll serve as a deterrence while this war continues for other people committing these acts of atrocity. Thousands of individuals living in Ukraine who've been victims of these atrocities. We must hold the Russians, Russian. That's what they are. We must hold them accountable. Prosecutor Kostin, thank you for being here again today, and